So she did her bit, and she's just the most wonderful, dramatic, dynamic person, and as you that know her concerto know, that's her music as well. So that's Ida. I always remember about her mother, too. They always had cats, and the cats were just crawling up and down her leg, and her stockings had all these rips. And, you know, certain things you just never forget, and that's one that I never forgot. So, but that pretty much summarizes what I can say. I thought I would stop these stories when people got arrested, and so I don't know if anybody's arrested yet or not, but that's probably enough. So, how about some questions, Bob?
Also, why don't you talk a little bit about growing up in Charlottesville, Virginia, and the influence of your parents? I have actually one funny story about your mom.
My mother was something else, and I just couldn't have been luckier to have her as a mother. But, well, growing up in Charlottesville, I mean, I did also grow up around the wartime, and one of the things I remember, we were one of 3 German-based families. My parents had both come to this country from Germany, mother actually from Austria, and we were apparently we were being watched by the FBI, and that was kind of scary. We found that out later after the war was over. My parents were at a cocktail party, and this man said, "Oh yeah, I know who you are. I used to watch your house." And my brother and I, there were woods behind our house. We just ran all around there, very athletic, and we must have really kept them running. And, but then I guess we came home once crying because they called us Nazis. So after that, there was no more German spoken in our house. So unfortunately, I never got to learn German because just of that one chance thing. But growing up in Charlottesville, I mean, I don't know what to say except it's a wonderful university town. It's the home of Thomas Jefferson. And Monticello is up on the hill. And it's a beautiful place to visit. Go see it. And all I can say about my mother is that she was a very strong woman who taught at the University of Virginia Nursing School. And probably anything that I became is because she wouldn't let me do less than my best. And that's what she always required. And I try to sort of do that with my students, too. You don't have to be the world's greatest clarinet player, but you've got to be as good as you can be personally. And I think she made me try to do that, and I appreciate her for that. But I hate to hear the story, but go, Bob.
Well, I'm not going to identify where it was, but it was a concert that I attended at the Trio, and the composer was present.
Yes.
And afterwards, we all went out, and I was at a table with Elsa's mother for a while, and the composer was at another table. She says, "Who's that with the composer?" And we said, "That's his mother and father." And she said, "You know, they should lock him in his room till he writes something pretty."
Mother was not one to mince words. But also, the piece was too long, and she said, too long. You remember that? And actually, we got him to shorten the piece, and actually, it's a very lovely piece. It's kind of impressionistic. So, well, she wasn't right all the time. But she was a character. So, anybody else have a question of any type? Yeah?
Would you talk a little bit about, I remember years and years ago, you talking about being a woman and you know, trying to be on the audition circuit.
I must say, that is certainly different from now. When I first went out, of course, at Eastman, you all wanted to be orchestral players, right? So as soon as there was an opening, you went to your typewriter and you wrote a letter applying. So Pete and Larry would get answers, and I'd never get answers. And then after a while, I realized, because I put down my name, Elsa. So I started just putting E.M. Ludwig, and then I got answers too. And so that was the first small thing. So then Pete and I drove down overnight to audition for second clarinet in Philadelphia. I mean, what nerve we had. But as Ted was saying today, there were a lot fewer people auditioning. Like, for instance, second in Washington. There were 25 of us. I came in second, and that's actually how I got to Marlborough, because then Harold Wright recommended me to go to Marlborough. So it goes to show, no matter what you do, another benefit may happen. I believe you alluded to that as well today. But so that was an experience. We got down there, and I said, "I'm E.M. Ludwig." And he says, "But you're a girl." And I said, so what did I say? He says, "You know, I don't know what you people expect us to do." He says, "Our second harp player is pregnant. What are we supposed to do while she has the baby?" And, you know, that was my welcome. "Thanks a lot, buddy." And anyhow, I didn't play well enough to get the job, and so it certainly wasn't prejudice. But that was not your probably gracious greeting, I guess you might say. I'm trying to think what else. There were all sorts of things. Oh, yes. Fred Fennell was keen on my playing, and he knew Arthur Fiedler. So Fiedler came through with the Boston Pops, and they had an opening for principal clarinet, and he said, why don't you just listen to her play? I think you'll like her playing. And he says, I don't want any damn woman clarinet player in my orchestra. And that was that. So I didn't audition for fiddler, did I? And it was things like that in those days. It really was. And of course, I was, I guess, a little unusual those 45 years ago when I was a woman clarinet player. But now, I mean, as we know, there are so many of them all over the country doing all sorts of wonderful work. And it doesn't make any difference anymore. But it sure did in those days. It was just great, actually, because I really shouldn't have been an orchestra player. I loved being here at MSU. I loved my students. You know, I could have probably kept on trying to be in an orchestra, but this was what I was supposed to do, so it was okay. The prejudice worked out. Yeah. Hi, Keith.
I heard stories that Keith Stein really had to go to bat to get hired here.
Well, good old Keith. I mean, he was just a model colleague. They sent my credentials. That was just to come here for 1 year. And, you know, they didn't know that I was going to I was going to stay here and they couldn't get me out kicking or screaming. But, so he had all my credentials and he thought they were good. And so he went to the quintet. And the flute teacher at that time said, if we have her when we're changing after concert to go home, she'll be taking too long, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so he did have to talk to the quintet. But the rest of the quintet, I must say, took me in, and then I got the job. And then when Keith came back, that he had been on sabbatical that year, he had a lot of trouble with arthritis, and he asked if they keep me on, so they did. So I owe that to Keith. Also, and I meant to mention this earlier, the very first clarinet conference of any significance was held in Denver, and I think it was 1965. I keep meaning to look that up. And I'd been here, about 3 years, and it was centered around Keith. It was the clarinet clinic. It was Ralph Strofe who started that. So Keith said, can I bring Elsa along? And so he did. And Mitchell Lurie played the first concert of that, and I played the second. And that eventually grew to be what we have now, the International Clarinet thing. But it all started because of Keith Stein, and whatever national reputation I got was because Keith gave me the opportunity. So always give your kids opportunities. It's always good. But anyway, wonderful man, Keith. Any other questions? Well, we'll have to go then, won't we? Oops, okay. One back here.
What are your plans after you retire?
Well, I was just telling someone just said that I flunked retirement, and I've been teaching 4, and next year I'll teach 3, and probably in the foreseeable future. I'm going to just sort of do a year at a time. But I still play with Lansing Symphony. The trio is very active. We're recording. So it's not a lot different, except that I just see fewer students. But then they're all giving their DMA recitals, so it's always extra time, and that's the way it is, and it's okay. But so it's not a lot different. It's just a few less students is all. So that's what I'm doing.
I've got a lot of time left. I studied 4 years with you, but I never paid attention. You started to get him.
Well, let me just say, as time goes on as you teach, you do get more organized, and I think I did. And you were at the early end of it. But what I've decided over my years is that I break up my teaching basically into 2 prongs. And the first thing I do is deal with all the physical part. And I usually have classes on Monday nights, which are no longer because Megan is busy on Monday nights. And I would talk about finger position. I have a really long harangue about finger position. That usually takes 2 Monday nights. First we talk about the position, the use of the fingers, and then I have a lot of exercises that I myself used to improve things that were still bothering me in my playing. So, and then I talk about articulation and acoustics and embouchure and tone exercises, and I have, quite a number of handouts for all that. Because I figure I was never quite sure, even once I got here, even having had wonderful teachers, how the clarinet really worked and what my problems were, and I had to figure them out myself, which is probably very good. So bit by bit, I did figure out, and switching to double lip helped as well. But I think that's very important. Then the other thing is, and the thing is, because if you set this up, doesn't mean they're going to do it, and they usually don't do it as well as I'd like, but they sort of understand all the principles. Again, it gets back to principles, and they can keep working on that the rest of their life. And if they, and I try to set up the idea that this is what the exercise is. You figure out first the problem, how to solve the problem, then you make exercises for it until it's natural. And that's what, and so I'd like to think that that's going to help them iron out any technical things. Then, of course, there's how to practice, and that's another story. But then the second thing is really important, is to be able to figure out a piece of music for yourself. And so I spent a lot of time with that. I think it's very important to know the form, because when there's an ABA, it's just like I read once in an English book on form. Once A has been through B, it's never the same again. And that's true to a great extent, with the Mozart concerto slow movement maybe being a little of a exception, because it's pretty much the same. But almost always the A comes back bigger. Or if it doesn't, then you do something different. And, you know, like you have 16-bar phrases. There's 8 bars. Usually the second 8 bars is more important than the first 8 bars, or that's where it all comes to a head. The climax is there. So if you understand, and then you see the lengths of phrases, and so we talk all about that, non-harmonic tones, lengths of phrases, then the different characteristics. There's scherzando, there's legato, there's all sorts of different lyrical, can be, you know, like just a little bit, dolce, and then sort of lyrical and singing, and then maybe poco appassionata, and then appassionata, and then molto appassionata. But you know what I mean? There are all these things. And then there's so many different colors the clarinet can create. And a piano is just, you know, means soft. But what kind of soft in this particular place? And the different registers of clarinet give you all sorts of different possibilities. And I think it's all in there. It's like that pizza sauce ad. It's all in there, but you've got to find it. It's all in there on the clarinet. So we spend a lot of time just figuring out how the piece really tells you how to play it. And if we do that with enough, we start out with etudes, good old Jean-Jean, yes? And go from there to some of the, well, pieces like Saint-Saëns, some of the ones that have sort of obvious forms. Even if they've played them, we just go through them rather quickly to point out how the form totally determines how you look at the piece. And then all the little ingredients, the, as I say, the non-harmonic tones, and different lengths of phrases, the use of your tongue to create the phrasing. So I just try to break down a piece, and then we sort of put it back together. So it's, again, analyzing, figuring out what it's all about. And so I figure you do that enough, and the student is going to have an idea of how to look at a piece themselves. That doesn't mean they have to play it my way. I just say, this is what I think the composer suggested and why. And I think the whole page is just hints and suggestions. And I always tell my students, play the music, don't play the notes. There are 2 things that appear on my music, students' music, air, and then just play the music, not the notes. And it all sort of goes from there. And no matter how much air you use, you can always use more. And invariably, when I mess up something, I could have used more air. If only, you know, I could have had a V8. So, I don't know, just that's the way it is. But anyway, so that's what I think. I think it's really, really important that one is organized in that way, and I kind of wish maybe some of my teachers had done that. But then I figured it out myself, and you know it better when you figure it out yourself, but it took a while. In fact, once at one of those clarinet conventions, I gave a lecture called After 12 Years, and that was my first 12 years at MSU, figuring out things on my own, and that's when things had more or less solidified. So you see, I didn't know all that stuff then. No, I knew some. My first 3 years at Ithaca before I came here were where I began to realize how one taught. But it just got more and more organized and clear in my mind as I went on. It's just a terrific thing to be a teacher, particularly with as good students as I've had. And I just learned so much from them, somehow or another, too, because, I don't know, I explain a piece sometimes to someone, and I think, my God, I never really thought of that before. And of course that's the way it is, right? You know, I just can't tell you how much having such good students made me understand what I was doing more and more. So you should all be so blessed to have students like these that are all here, and the ones that aren't. The ones that were afraid to come, because they'd hear me talk. Are there any other questions about anything, Carol?
It's about legato fingers.
Legato fingers, yeah. Yeah, we got a review once where they talked about my feathery fingers, and I got ribbed by the quintet for quite some time after. Here comes feathery fingers. But, well, you know, you have your moment when all of a sudden you realize, oh my God, I just not playing legato at all. I was playing, one of my DMA recitals did The Shepherd on the Rock, and it was sort of like da-da-da, pop-pop-pop-pop, da-da-da-da-da, pop-pop-pop-pop, and then the singer comes in, tee-da-da, smooth-da-da, you know, and no pops. And I thought, this is an eye-opening thing. This is a moment of revelation. So I started to work on that, and with Hasty. And so I figured there are two totally types of different finger thing. The first is just with really fast fingers. You keep your fingers curved, and your fingers go like that, with your thumb, of course, like this. And the second is, and you want to have an impact, you want to have that kind of an impact on the clarinet. But the second is just the opposite. You don't want to have the impact. You want to have your fingers go down, and they go down, as Hasty described it, as a kind of a half tense motion. And the thing is, and a lot of my students don't either do that or quite believe it yet, but they'll do it one day. They like to be right here, and then they just kind of squeeze down. And you can do that, but it's not always successful. But if you learn to do it, I always say the letter C, like this, and then you bring the finger down like that, you can just control it very nicely, and you can eliminate that, particularly the B natural. And so to me, that's just exactly the opposite. And it's like this, then it's like that. You don't go down in jerks, or you don't go like here and then boom. You just all one relatively slow movement. And I think that's a very, very important part of playing the clarinet. So I spend a lot of time talking about that too at some point. So that's feathery fingers. FF. Fred Fennell. Yeah, that was nice too, Fred. At the end, every time you had been in his Eastman Wind Ensemble, he had something called the Ching Foom Society. And he had been a percussion, and it's ching, boom, right? So there are two cymbals and a big bass drum, and you all saw that in my studio, I'm sure. And then he would list all the things you had done. If you were a principal clarinet, you were in how many albums. And so it was really a nice thing, and I treasure that a lot, that thing from Fred Fennell. He was so smart. That's something else I meant to say about Fred. He came here once as a sabbatical replacement while we were looking for a new orchestra conductor. And you'd go out to dinner with him or lunch, and he knew something about every topic. It was just uncanny, and I mean in depth. I was just really knocked out, and he and Walter talked a lot. I just listened because Walter's smart, and and he knows these things, and so did Fred. It was just amazing. So he was something special. They say once he came roaring out as he would, and he leapt to the stage, and he slipped and he fell. Thank God I wasn't there for that, but that must have been embarrassing. So, yeah, Don?
Well, you've traveled much more than I might ever do, so I was just wondering, where's maybe your favorite place or one of your favorite places that you've been with the trio?
Yeah, we have just traveled a huge amount, and when it really is something, I never applied for a Fulbright because I was afraid to go by myself to Europe, and now we've been around the world, I think 7 times now, and been to a lot of countries, but I have to say Australia is where it's at. And y'all should get to know Roz and go visit Roz down in Australia. I have 3 or 4 people down in Australia that studied here. But in the first place, of course, they speak English, that's nice. But in the second place, they have such wonderful food and wine. And the people are so gracious. You know how the service people here are usually surly? They're not surly down there. And I just can't get over that because we're just used to people being impolite anymore in our country. It really, I've just noticed that change a lot over the years. And down there, they're just sort of bright and happy, and Sydney is the most glorious place. And if you go, I tell you where you want to go to dinner. There's the Quay here, and here's the bridge. There's a wonderful fish restaurant right here. And you sit outside, even in cold weather, they have big heaters, and you get yourselves a really chill New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, and you invite Peter Sculthorpe to join you, and you give him a drink or two, and he's good. And here's the Sydney Opera House here, and that's the first thing we do every time we go to Australia is go there with Peter Sculthorpe, who again is just a character. Like he still remembers, he was at my last contemporary festival that I threw, I guess that was about 3 years ago, and Maxine told him about a grizzly bear in her yard in Montana. And last time we saw him, he said, "How's that girl with the grizzly bear?" But you remember he came to the party afterwards. We had a party at our house afterwards, and there's a party animal, huh? He had such a good time, and so did everybody that met him. But, and he has a little MG. When we ride in the MG, I have to sit in the back where there's hardly, you know how women are always in the back. And Walter and he are in the front, and I'm just sort of, you know, squeezed into the back. But,
Did you say something about road rage?
Road rage? Yeah. Yeah, we went to South Carolina. We had, the Joan and Libby show. Joan Tower and Libby Larson were doing, I guess, classes. We played 3 places in South Carolina. We were playing their pieces, so they were there not only talking about our pieces and hearing them, but giving classes. And it happened Peter Sculthorpe came to our concert in Washington, so he came down with us. And that was when the election, you remember, when in 2000, when Bush sort of won. And at that time, it hadn't been decided. And so he would go down to all these rednecks in the bars, it was in South Carolina, and sort of bait them, trying to find out how they voted, because they were all Bush fans. But in any case, I guess, we were to drive to the next place. I think we were going to Spartanburg to Congress College. And I said, do you want me to drive, Walter? Because Walter had driven us from the University of South Carolina. And Peter said, no. He said, you inspire road rage. He wouldn't let me drive, because he knew how I drove. He's really and he still remembers you too, Gene. He said, who was that Southern girl? Kind of sassy Southern girl. But see what I mean? That's another thing, all you guys, you've got to commission people. Suzanne is playing a commission piece later today, because the composers are such interesting people, and you can just have a wonderful time getting to know them. And so that in itself has just been a revelation. I mean, I can't tell you the number of good times we've had with so many composers. So commission people. You'll like it.
Well, tell us a little about the quintet.
I'm sorry?
You played in the quintet for...
Yeah, the first 20 years, and then it really got to be too much to do the trio and the quintet. But yeah, I mean, how about that? The first 20 years, the second 20 years. Who thought I would last this long, huh? But we used to do quite a few tours. We were managed by Albert Kay, and we had a good time. It was a good group. Yeah, my favorite story about the quintet, our friend Ethel Armeling, who taught voice here for so many years, would be down here, and she'd go this way when the library was still where now Chris Kay hangs out with the admissions office. And so Ethel would go by there, and we'd be rehearsing in my studio, and there'd be nothing. And then all of a sudden, as she got toward the library, she heard this huge laugh, and that was us rehearsing. We were laughing, we were talking. And she said she heard sound really only about half the time. And that might explain why we weren't maybe the most successful quintet, but we did have a good time. So that was a quintet. Actually, when I came here to audition, this might be of use to you too. I knew it was a quintet job, so I went to the Eastman Library. Honest to God, I got out every major quintet there was, took the clarinet parts out, stacked the rest here in this room, and went through every part and worked on it. And they had told me 1 or 2 pieces, but I knew they'd have some reading. So we had to read the Tomasi Quintet. They thought I was a heck of a sight reader, but I had practiced that. And they asked if I'd ever played it before, and I hadn't with a quintet. I just didn't practice it. But, you know, you cannot be too prepared for an audition, and you really kind of anticipate, and that was what I did. And I got the job, and then, as you see, it was hard for them to dislodge me after that. So, but that was the quintet. Oh, Katie? Anything else that anybody wants to ask or comment on? That's good. Particularly the not commenting on. So, someone wants to comment. Okay.
What made you decide to play clarinet?
Well, it was in Janusa when I heard the sound of that clarinet. I had no idea it was supposed to sound that way. It was really just an astonishment to me, because that's not the way clarinet sounded in those days. We're talking really early, you understand. We're talking back way in the middle of the other century. So, yeah, see Australia Cup. Yeah, we've gone to see Steve Irwin's Jungle Place there. We've been to all sorts of places, held many a cuddly koala bear. I mean, so that's another thing, fantastic animals. And then in the middle is Ayers Rock, and then at the end is, what the heck is it, Perth. And if you're on Northwest Airlines, you have to fly Malaysian Airlines to get there so you can get your miles. So you go via Malaysia, and then you end up in Perth, and then you go to where all the East Coast cities are. And up here, it's the warmest, up in Cairns, where the Barrier Reef is, and then you go on down here, Sydney, keep going. There's Adelaide, and they have so many good wine areas there. we've certainly tried them all, the Hunter Valley, the Barossa Valley. And, but that's what you do on these tours. You, you do your thing, you do your classes, then you stay an extra day and you see what's to be seen and savored. And I really think that is important. In fact, let me give George Wong credit too. When he took a sabbatical, he always went to Europe and had a good time. I don't know if in those days he had a project. But every time we've had a sabbatical, we've sort of followed in his footsteps. We've always done concerts, and a lot of them during that time. But then we've always left time to see the places where we were. And so, I mean, if you're going to be there, you might as well see. Like we stayed in Puerto Rico with Don a couple extra days to finish that off. So you can learn all sorts of things from your teacher that don't have to do with the clarinet. And that's what I learned from George Wong. So, okay, is that probably enough? Well, thank you for being attentive. Thank you.